At my graduation dinner, my mother looked at me with that cold, familiar glare. "Emily, you'll never be as good as your brother Ethan. He's the one who carries this family." My chest tightened, but I pushed back the chair, my voice trembling yet firm. "Then let Ethan pay all the bills. From this moment, I won't send another cent." The room froze. Forks hung in midair, my mother's face twisted in disbelief. "What money? We've never received a single dollar from you." I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened my bank statements. Line after line appeared on the glowing screen, transfers marked clearly. For parents, and in that instant, every eye in the room shifted from admiration to suspicion. "Hi, my name is Emily Carter, 26 years old. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a small house on the edge of the industrial city once known for its towering steel mills releasing smoke every morning. My father worked shifts at an old steel plant, coming home every day with a face darkened by soot and hands hardened by calluses. My mother worked as an accountant at a small office, hunched over endless rows of numbers. My family was not wealthy, but we never went hungry either. What weighed heavily on our home was the unspoken comparison between me and Ethan, my brother who was 3 years older. From a very young age, I could clearly feel that I was only the shadow behind him. Ethan was outgoing, always knowing how to please the adults, and with just a smile or a witty story, he could fill the room with laughter. I, on the other hand, preferred sitting for hours with Lego pieces or old wires my father brought home from the factory, dismantling and reassembling them to understand how they worked. To me, it was a magical world, but in my parents' eyes, I was wasting time on something useless. Whenever guests visited, my mother would proudly call Ethan out to show off his basketball trophies or his bright certificates of achievement. I was only mentioned in passing. "Emily gets good grades, but she really needs to be more social. Always glued to the computer won't get her anywhere." I stayed quiet, pretending not to hear, but inside, I felt a small cut deepen each time. A Christmas memory from when I was 10 years old is still etched deeply in my mind. I spent an entire week building a small desk lamp from scraps of plastic and old light bulbs, carefully wrapping it in colored paper and tying a ribbon, hoping my mother would smile and say, "My daughter is so skillful." On Christmas Eve, Ethan sang a few carols, and everyone clapped in delight. When I nervously handed my little gift to my mother, she barely glanced at it before saying, "You should learn how to have fun with people. A girl who spends all her time on machines won't get anywhere. One day, it'll even be hard for you to find a husband." I forced a smile, but once I stepped into my room, tears streamed down my face. The small lamp glowed brightly, but it couldn't light up my heart that night. Things weren't much better in elementary and middle school. I loved science classes, loved assembling simple circuits in the lab, while Ethan was celebrated as the promising captain of the basketball team. Each time we brought home invitations for parent-teacher conferences, my parents eagerly attended Ethan's, while mine was brushed off quickly. Once, my science teacher praised my research skills and awarded me first place in the school science fair. I carried the trophy home, my heart racing with the hope of finally making my parents proud. But that very day, Ethan scored the winning point in a basketball game, and my parents spent the whole evening celebrating his victory. My trophy was left on the shelf, slowly gathering dust. The older I grew, the clearer the difference became. Ethan was always the center of attention at family gatherings, while I would quietly sit in a corner, listening to endless stories about the talented son of the Carter family. Many times, relatives would casually remark, "Emily is sweet, but she's so plain, nothing like her brother." I would force a smile, but those words carved themselves into my memory, each one like a blade etching into the walls of my soul. I began to withdraw, speaking less, sharing little about the things I loved. In my small room, I kept nurturing my passion for technology. I dismantled old radios, studied their inner workings, and tried soldering wires to produce distorted sounds from tiny speakers. I wrote simple lines of code on my aging computer, feeling as if I could create an entirely new world. But when my mother happened to catch me, she only shook her head and said, "A girl needs to learn how to communicate if she wants a future." I stayed silent, though inside, a storm raged. Was my worth really measured only by how much I resembled Ethan? There were countless nights I lay awake, wondering if I was an unwanted child, born merely to serve as a shadow to the family's golden boy. I longed for a hug, a word of recognition, but instead I received cold glances and constant comparisons. Over time, I taught myself to bury my emotions, building an invisible wall to protect what was left of me. Yet no matter how hard I tried to be strong, deep down, I remained that little girl still asking, will there ever come a day when my parents truly see me, not as a pale copy of Ethan, but as Emily, an individual with dreams and value of her own? My years at Pittsburgh High were a mix of excitement and anxiety. The school was vast, its hallways always echoing with laughter and chatter from close-knit friend groups, and the cheerleaders brought an electric energy before every basketball game. While many girls my age were drawn to makeup, dating, or lively art clubs, I found refuge in the science lab and the robotics club. Those were the spaces where I felt safe, where the soft whir of tiny motors, the faint burnt scent from a soldering iron, and the strings of simple code gave me the sense that I was creating something meaningful. In the lab, I wasn't compared to anyone. I wasn't forced to be charming or funny. I was simply Emily, the girl who loved technology, patiently assembling chips and gears until the robot managed to take a few shaky steps across the table, moments that made me feel as if I had conquered the world. But that quiet joy stood in sharp contrast to the image of Ethan, my brother 3 years older, who had become the symbol of the entire school. Ethan joined the basketball team, and with his height and confident social skills, he quickly rose to the status of school star. He wasn't just good at sports, he was often chosen as the MC for major school events. On stage, microphone in hand, his bright smile and captivating voice could electrify an entire auditorium. Teachers adored him, friends admired him, and every time I walked through the halls and saw all those eyes filled with admiration for Ethan, I felt smaller than ever. There was a time when my robotics club team successfully built a small robot that could sort objects by color. We were chosen to present it at the school's annual science fair, an event I had been looking forward to for months. The night before, I was so nervous I couldn't sleep, picturing my parents in the audience, watching me stand on stage with confidence, and maybe, just maybe this time they would say, "Emily, we are proud of you." But when the presentation began, I looked down at the seats I had reserved for them and saw only emptiness. My heart sank, but I pressed on with the presentation, my hands trembling as I held the little robot. After the ceremony, I called my mother. She spoke casually, almost dismissively. "Sorry, Ethan had an important game today, and we had to be there to cheer him on. Next time, make sure you let us know earlier." I stayed silent, swallowing the sob lodged in my throat. Deep down, I knew there would never really be a next time meant for me. At school, I withdrew further into myself. While Ethan was praised by teachers as a shining example, the comments I received were always the same. "Emily is a good student, but she's too shy. She should learn to be more like her brother." That sentence, repeated like a broken record, spoken by teachers, echoed by my parents, reinforced by relatives until it became a haunting refrain. Each time I heard it, I felt another piece of my worth being erased, as though I could only be recognized if I became a copy of Ethan. Family dinners were no escape from comparison either. My father would enthusiastically recount Ethan's perfect shot or how his coach praised his teamwork. I wanted to share that my robotics team had just found a way to improve our sensors, but the moment I opened my mouth, my mother cut in. "That's enough, you can talk later. Your father's telling us about Ethan." I quietly closed my notebook, forcing down the lump in my throat. Little by little, I stopped wanting to share anything at all, knowing no one would ever listen. Sometimes, I wondered if I was simply too invisible, or if my parents' love had a limit enough for only one child. I didn't hate Ethan. Deep in my heart, I still loved my brother. But the constant favoritism covered that love with a layer of dust, turning it into distance. What I longed for was just one moment where my parents would look me straight in the eye and say, "Well done, Emily." But that wish remained nothing more than an echo in my mind, never becoming reality. By the time I finished high school, I had quietly promised myself that I would step out from under my brother's suffocating shadow and carve out a path of my own, proving that my worth did not depend on comparisons. That chance came when I received my acceptance letter to study computer science at the University of Washington in Seattle, along with a partial scholarship. It was a sweltering summer day, and I sat in my small room in Pittsburgh, staring at the letter with trembling hands. I knew this was my ticket out, away from endless comparisons, away from the look in my parents' eyes that only lit up for Ethan, and toward a place where I could finally breathe. Seattle welcomed me with drizzling rain and damp, chilly air, a sharp contrast to the thick smog of Pittsburgh. At first, the loneliness was suffocating. With no familiar faces and no family nearby, I had to handle everything on my own, from finding a cheap room to renting, to grocery shopping and cooking, to stretching the modest scholarship money as far as it would go. To cover the rest of my tuition and living expenses, I got a job at a cafe near campus. Morning shifts began at 5, the roar of the coffee grinder drowning out the fatigue in my head, and as soon as my shift ended, I would rush to the lecture halls to make it to class on time. At night, while others went out to socialize, I opened my laptop and took on small freelance coding projects to earn extra income. Life was exhausting and relentless, but I felt lighter than ever before, because here, no one called me Ethan's little sister. While I fought day by day to hold on in Seattle, Ethan was heading down a completely different path. He had once enrolled in a prestigious business school in the Northeast, but after just a year, he dropped out, saying the academic environment was too restrictive. Instead, he declared he would become an entrepreneur, pitching flashy but vague projects. On phone calls, my mother's voice brimmed with pride. "Ethan is working on a startup. You wouldn't understand. He's very busy, meeting with important business people." Every time I heard that, I felt both amused and bitter. I knew Ethan had never had the discipline or patience to follow through on long-term plans, yet my parents placed absolute faith in him, even sending him money to invest in his future. I remember clearly one time during my first semester in Seattle when I needed to buy a set of programming textbooks that cost more than $200. It was an amount I simply couldn't afford after paying rent and groceries. I hesitated for a long time before finally calling my mother, hoping for at least a little help. But her response left me frozen. "We're sending money to Ethan so he can expand his project. You'll have to manage on your own. You're smart, you'll figure it out." Her voice was gentle, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I sat motionless for hours, tears dripping onto the keyboard, unable to understand how my parents could so easily pour money into his vague ideas yet refuse when I needed books for serious study. In those moments, I asked myself if my worth had ever mattered in their eyes. I worked myself to the bone, living so frugally that many nights I survived on instant noodles, yet they never once asked how I was managing. Meanwhile, Ethan constantly posted photos on social media, wearing suits at conferences, checking in at upscale bars, standing beside rental cars just for the image. My parents saw those pictures and proudly told relatives that their son was on his way to becoming a successful businessman. As for me, carrying the weight of tuition and scholarships every day, I was only mentioned vaguely. "Emily is still studying, maybe she'll be some kind of engineer later." And yet, those lonely days in Seattle forged me stronger than I had ever been. I gradually learned how to balance, how to turn exhaustion into motivation. After every cafe shift, I returned to my tiny rented room, brewed a cup of hot tea, opened my laptop, and sank into the world of algorithms. Seeing my code run successfully was the only medicine that convinced me I was on the right path. My classmates were often surprised at my persistence, calling me the steel girl, perhaps meant as a joke, but it still made me smile. I knew that only knowledge and effort were true foundations, not the hollow boasts Ethan used to draw attention. 4 years of college passed, and I not only maintained my scholarship but also gained valuable work experience through freelance projects. I managed to cover all my expenses without relying on anyone. I even saved a small amount in case my parents ever needed help. I always believed that one day, when they saw me standing firmly on my own, they would realize that true worth is not in showmanship but in persistence and sincerity. Yet deep down, I also knew it might take a lifetime to convince them, people who had grown accustomed to placing their faith in glitter and overlooking what was quiet and steady. When I held my bachelor's degree in computer science in my hands, I felt as if I had finally reached an important milestone in my life. The grueling years in Seattle had given me a resilience I never thought I possessed. And as a fitting reward, I received a job offer from a mid-sized tech company in San Francisco specializing in cloud computing solutions. It wasn't a big name like Google or Facebook, but for me, it was the doorway to a stable life and the chance to prove I could stand on my own without anyone's backing. I moved to the Bay Area with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. Life in San Francisco was far more expensive than in Seattle, from rent to even the simplest meals on the street. I rented a tiny apartment in the Mission District, barely 25 square meters, just enough for a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking an alley painted with colorful graffiti. I woke up early each morning to walk to the BART station, squeezing into the crowd of commuters heading downtown. My new job filled me with excitement. Every day, I worked on developing key modules alongside colleagues who were smart and creative. My starting salary was enough to keep me from worrying about every penny the way I had as a student. I knew I was finally stepping into a new stage of life, more mature, more independent. But that joy didn't last long. One evening, I received a call from my mother. Her voice trembled as she told me my father had been rushed to the hospital with a heart attack. Although he had stabilized, the doctor advised him to quit his job at the steel plant, warning that decades of grueling labor had worn down his heart more than steel ever could. I sat quietly by the window of my apartment, staring at the flickering lights of San Francisco, my chest heavy with guilt. For years, I had focused solely on my own path, forgetting that my parents were growing older and more fragile every day. Not long after, my mother informed me she had to cut back her hours at the accounting office in order to take care of my father. That meant the family's income took a steep decline. I knew that without my help, they would struggle with every bill, the electricity, the medications, even repairs to the old house in Pittsburgh. Without hesitation, I decided to send home between $2,000 and $2,500 from my paycheck each month. It was no small amount, especially with San Francisco's crushing cost of living, but I knew I had no choice. I didn't want my parents to worry about basic needs while their health continued to decline. The only problem was that my parents were not familiar with using online banking. Mobile apps and digital accounts seemed like a confusing maze to them. I tried guiding my mother over the phone, but she only sighed and said, "I don't understand all those buttons. What if I make a mistake?" While searching for a solution, I immediately thought of Ethan, since he still lived in Pittsburgh and often visited our parents. I called him and explained that I would transfer money into his account each month, and his job would be to withdraw it in cash and hand it directly to our parents. After listening, Ethan laughed and said, "That's nothing, Emily. Leave it to me, I'll take care of Mom and Dad for you." His confident tone gave me a sense of reassurance. Deep down, I held on to a simple belief. Ethan might be lazy, boastful, and careless, but he was still my brother, the one who had shared childhood with me in that old house. I trusted that no one would ever betray their own parents. So from that month onward, I began sending a large sum regularly into Ethan's account, always noting clearly, "For parents." Each time I pressed the transfer button, I imagined my mother using that money to buy my father's medicine or pay the utility bills, and I felt a little more at peace. To keep up with this commitment, I had to cut down nearly all personal expenses. I no longer dared to eat out often, choosing instead to cook simple meals at home. I declined outings with colleagues to save every dollar. Some months, I hardly bought anything for myself, not even something small like a new dress. But I never complained. Every time I heard my mother's voice sound brighter, telling me my father had enough medication, I felt that every sacrifice was worth it. Sometimes, in the middle of my hectic work schedule, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Ethan often posted photos on social media dressed in sharp suits, driving luxury cars, and drinking at expensive bars. I couldn't help but wonder how could he afford such a lavish lifestyle when his startup had no real stability. But then I reassured myself, maybe he had found a good partner, or perhaps he had secured some investment. I didn't want to think poorly of my brother, didn't want to let trust turn into suspicion. Deep down, I believed that sending money through Ethan was also a way to bridge the gap between us. Maybe it would help him feel a sense of responsibility, teach him to be more grounded, and show him that I trusted him too. I hoped that this trust might create a new bond between us, siblings, after so many years of me feeling abandoned in his shadow. I didn't realize then that this very trust would soon become the greatest mistake of my life. After setting aside such a large portion of my salary to send home through Ethan's account, what remained was barely enough to cover the rent for my tiny apartment and simple meals. Most nights, my dinner was just a bowl of vegetable soup or instant noodles from a discount grocery store. I grew used to walking past the fancy shops on Market Street without stopping, used to declining invitations from colleagues to dine out, just to avoid spending an extra $20 or $30. I kept reminding myself that every sacrifice was worth it, because my parents needed me. But while I was counting every penny, Ethan's social media looked like the pages of a luxury magazine. One day, he posed beside a shiny SUV, the next he showed off a gold watch on his wrist, and the following week he posted a video raising a glass of red wine at an upscale bar in downtown Pittsburgh. Beneath those posts, relatives and friends flooded the comments with admiration. Ethan is so successful, the golden boy of the Carter family. Every time I stumbled across them, I felt a mix of confusion and bitterness. I knew he didn't have a stable job, that his vague startup projects had never brought in profit, so where was the money coming from to fund that glamorous lifestyle? The questions circled endlessly in my mind, but I silenced myself with the same refrain. Don't doubt your brother, he must have a reasonable explanation. It was during that time that Daniel came into my life. He was a colleague on the same engineering team, a quiet man with bright eyes and a gentle, genuine smile. We often crossed paths during late shifts, when the office had emptied, leaving only the sound of keyboards clicking and the glow of desk lamps on tired faces. Daniel would make me a cup of coffee, let me bury myself in lines of code, and then softly ask, "Emily, are you doing okay?" That simple concern caught me off guard, because rarely did anyone pay attention to how I felt. From small conversations about software bugs, we gradually became close. One weekend evening, as Daniel and I sat in a small diner, I let slip that I had been sending money home to my parents each month through Ethan's account. I said it as if to ease a burden, but Daniel looked at me intently, his voice suddenly serious. "Emily, I think you should check directly. Your brother doesn't seem very transparent." I froze, the spoon suspended in midair. I gave a nervous laugh. "He's my family, Daniel. No matter what, he would never betray our parents." But Daniel's eyes stayed steady, filled with concern. "I don't want to make you suspicious for no reason," he said quietly. "But sometimes it's the people closest to us who can hurt us the most. Please be careful, Emily." Those words haunted me for days. I wanted to push them aside, to believe Ethan had sources of income I didn't know about, that the photos he posted online were the result of some effort I simply hadn't seen. But every time I opened my bank account and looked at the large sums I had transferred with the note for parents, a wave of unease rose inside me. What if that money never reached them? What if all those flashy pictures had been paid for with my own sweat and sacrifice? I scolded myself for letting Daniel's words plant seeds of doubt. I tried to chase them away by reminding myself that Ethan was my brother, my own flesh and blood. After all, I had grown up used to our parents favoring him, used to being treated as a shadow. But never, not once, had I imagined Ethan would take my money and use it for himself. To think that way felt like admitting I had placed my trust in the wrong person, that all these months I had been lying to myself. Every night, lying in my small apartment, I pictured my father gasping for breath by his hospital bed and my mother bent over the table, calculating each bill. I sent money so they would carry less of that burden, so they could live their later years in peace. The thought that this money might have been used by someone, my own brother, to show off in front of his friends made my chest ache. And yet, instead of facing the truth, I chose silence. I was afraid that if I spoke up, I would shatter the fragile bond still holding our family together. Caught between blood ties and doubt, I felt trapped in a conflict with no way out. By day, I continued to send money, telling my mother over the phone, "Everything here is fine." By night, I lay awake, Daniel's words echoing in my mind. "Be careful, Emily." I tried to convince myself I was right, that this trust would not be betrayed. But deep in my chest, a nameless fear grew larger each day, waiting for the moment to break free. 2 years later, after beginning my graduate program at Columbia University, I had endured countless nights in the Morningside Heights Library, exhausting programming labs and summer jobs to cover tuition. When I finally held my master's degree in computer science, I knew I had gone further than my family had ever imagined. To mark this milestone, I decided to host a small dinner at an Italian restaurant on Columbus Avenue, where the soft yellow lights washed over brick walls, creating a warmth just right for family. I reserved a long table, carefully arranged the menu, and sent out invitations, hoping only for a peaceful evening where my parents might smile and feel even a little proud of me. That evening, the atmosphere at first was truly lively. Relatives gathered in full, glasses clinked together in a chorus of toasts and laughter. Ethan, as always, arrived in a tailored suit, polished shoes, and a gleaming watch that sparkled under the lights. Instantly, he became the center of attention. Aunts and uncles showered him with praise, calling him thoughtful, always looking after his parents, repeating again and again that it was thanks to Ethan that the family remained steady. One relative even clapped my father on the shoulder and said loudly, "You two are so blessed to have such a dutiful son, sending money home every month and taking such good care of you." The table erupted in laughter, and every gaze turned toward Ethan, filled with admiration and pride. I sat at the head of the table, hands clasped tightly beneath the chair, forcing a strained smile. My heart ached with every beat as I listened to words of praise that never belonged to him. The money I had scraped and saved for years had suddenly been claimed as Ethan's doing. I still hoped my mother would step in to correct them, but instead, she turned to me, her voice sharp with reproach. "Look at Ethan. He knows how to take care of family, and you? You only think about yourself, always busy with your career, never caring about anyone else." Her words struck like a blade twisting deep in front of everyone. In that moment, blood surged hot in my veins, years of humiliation, hurt, and doubt bursting all at once. I shot to my feet, the chair clattering against the wooden floor with a sharp crack that silenced the table instantly. My voice shook, but each word came out clear. "If that's what you think, then from now on let Ethan cover everything. I won't be sending another dime." The room froze. The faces that had been smiling turned to stone, their eyes shifting from surprise to stunned disbelief. My mother, instead of softening her tone, grew even colder. She narrowed her eyes as if I had just said something absurd. "Sending money? We've never received a single cent from you. Don't make things up here just to humiliate your brother." Her accusation fell heavy in the air, and the room erupted into whispers. I looked around and saw relatives' faces glinting with doubt. A few shook their heads, murmuring that I was ungrateful. My father furrowed his brow, staring at me in silence as if to ask, "What are you talking about?" I felt as though I couldn't breathe, but at the same time, a strange courage rose within me. With trembling hands but steady eyes, I pulled my phone from my bag and opened my banking app. I scrolled through the long list of transfers I had made regularly for the past 2 years, each transaction clearly marked. For parents. I held the screen in front of my mother, my voice firm. "Here. Every payment I've sent. Every month, $2,500, sometimes more, all transferred into Ethan's account. I did it so you wouldn't have to struggle. But today, hearing you speak, I realize that in everyone's eyes, it's as if I've never done anything at all. The air in the restaurant grew so thick I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. The room, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now sat in suffocating silence. Dozens of eyes turned toward Ethan like floodlights demanding an explanation. My mother clasped her hands tightly, staring at him without blinking, while my father let out a heavy sigh, his eyes red with both anger and disappointment. Ethan shifted uneasily in his chair, the napkin in his hands twisted into a crumpled mess. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he took a deep breath and spoke in a hoarse voice. "All right, I'll tell the truth. I kept most of the money Emily sent. I only gave Mom and Dad a little. A few $100s each month." The room erupted in murmurs, while I stood frozen, feeling both the sting of betrayal and a strange sense of relief that the truth had finally come out. Ethan lowered his head and continued. "I'm in debt, a lot of debt. All my startup projects failed. I used that money to pay what I owed, to keep up appearances, to make everyone believe I was successful. I didn't want Mom and Dad to be disappointed in me." My mother sat as if struck by lightning, tears spilling uncontrollably as she buried her face in her hands. She sobbed. "Oh God, all this time I blamed the wrong child. I didn't believe you, Emily. I even scolded you, said you were selfish, that you only thought about yourself." Her voice broke with regret. I looked at her, my chest tightening. For years, I had only wished that she would see my efforts just once, and now, when it finally happened, it came wrapped in pain. My father, usually a man who hid his emotions, could no longer contain himself. He slammed his hand against the table, his voice shaking. "Ethan, you have shamed me. Your sister worked herself to the bone, sending money to help us, and you took advantage of her. All these years, your mother and I have been blinded by the hollow shell of your so-called success." His words made Ethan bow his head even lower, his shoulders trembling. I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment I had to draw a line. I couldn't let the matter end with just a few apologies. Looking directly at my parents, I spoke calmly but firmly. "I will continue to help, but I have 3 conditions. First, from now on, there will be no more comparisons between me and Ethan. I am Emily, not a lesser copy of my brother. Second, every form of support must be transparent. I will send money directly into your account, or I will pay the bills myself. I need to know exactly how the money is being used. And third, Ethan must take responsibility too. If he truly wants to be part of this family, then he must contribute to caring for our parents, not just live off a facade of success." The table fell into absolute silence. My father slowly nodded, his voice choked. "You're right, Emily. From this day forward, there will be no more comparisons. We were wrong to let you bear so much hardship all these years." My mother was still in tears, but she clasped my hand tightly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, my daughter. I promise to change. You've done so much for this family and never received recognition. I don't want to lose you." I squeezed my mother's hand, my heart torn between pain and relief. The words I had waited my whole life to hear were finally spoken, though in circumstances no one would have wished for. Ethan lifted his head, his face flushed with shame, eyes brimming with tears. He stammered. "Emily, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I was selfish. I let you carry the burden that should have been mine. I promise I'll change. I'll find a proper job, I'll start truly contributing to Mom and Dad. I don't want to lose this family." I looked at him, conflicted. Part of me wanted to forgive, but another part couldn't forget the bitterness of betrayal. Yet at the very least, I saw him bow his head for the first time, instead of holding it high with pride. The relatives sitting around the table, once the audience to the performance, were now silent. A few lowered their heads, embarrassed by the praise they had showered on Ethan all evening. The applause was gone, replaced by uneasy glances in my direction. One aunt sighed softly and whispered, "Emily is the one who carried this whole family." I drew in a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I wasn't joyful, nor did I feel victorious, but I knew I had reclaimed my own voice. My parents nodded in agreement with the conditions I had set, and Ethan bowed his head, promising to change. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where truth had been laid bare and old wounds had the chance to heal. After that turbulent graduation dinner, I knew things could never return to the way they were, but I also realized I needed to take the lead in building a new foundation for my family. The very next week, I opened a joint account with my mother and taught her how to use the banking app over video calls. At first, she fumbled, afraid of pressing the wrong button, but I patiently guided her through each step from entering the password to checking the balance. From then on, I transferred $2,500 directly into that account every month, along with a reminder. Mom, make sure to keep the receipts for Dad's medication, the house repairs, or any other expenses. I didn't say it to control her, but to ensure everything was transparent and fair. For the first time in my life, my mother didn't object or compare me to my brother. She simply nodded, eyes glistening with tears. I understand, Emily. I won't let the past repeat itself. As my family slowly found its balance again, my own life moved into a new chapter. Daniel, the man who had stood by me and warned me with honesty from the very beginning, remained at my side, patiently listening to thoughts I had never shared with anyone. One late autumn afternoon in Central Park, while I was in New York on a work trip, Daniel suddenly knelt down beside a park bench, holding out a simple yet elegant ring. "Emily," he said softly, "I can't promise to make you rich or your life perfect. But I promise to always stand beside you, no matter how your family or the world out there treats you. Will you marry me?" I broke down in tears, unable to hold them back, and nodded, overwhelmed by a happiness that was simple yet profoundly deep. Our wedding was held in a small church in New York, where golden light streamed through stained glass windows and simple wooden pews lined the aisle. I never wished for a grand celebration, only the presence of those who truly came for me. What moved me most was that both my parents and Ethan were there. There were no comparisons, no suspicion, just tentative smiles at first that gradually softened into warmth. My father sat in the front row, my mother's hand resting on his in a quiet show of unity. Ethan, dressed in a modest suit, came forward after the ceremony to hug me tightly, whispering, "Congratulations, Emily. I'll try to be someone you can trust again." When I looked at him, I no longer saw arrogance in his eyes, but sincerity. That wedding was not lavish, but in the atmosphere of reconciliation, I knew it was the beginning of a new family, not only the one Daniel and I were building together, but also a chance for the Carter family to piece itself back together. As I stepped out of the church in my white dress, Daniel's hand in mine, the evening sun shone down, and I realized, at last, I was no longer alone. I had a husband by my side, parents who had learned to acknowledge me, and even Ethan, who was beginning to change. Everything I had endured, the years of being overlooked, the silent transfers of money, the sting of betrayal, had become the foundation for a turning point where I could finally live true to my own worth. Many years have passed since that graduation dinner that changed everything in my family. Now, life with Daniel has settled into something steady in San Francisco. We bought a small house in the suburbs, with a little backyard where I spend weekends planting sunflowers. Every morning, when the first rays of sunlight slip through the window, I look out at that golden garden and feel lighter, more at peace than ever before. The house isn't luxurious, but it is the home I once dreamed of during those lonely nights in Pittsburgh, a place where I can truly be myself, no longer compared or dismissed. My parents have changed a great deal too. They've grown used to using their bank account and often call me just to ask about my work, rather than talking only about Ethan as they used to. Whenever they fly to San Francisco to visit, my father likes to sit on the wooden chair in the garden, gazing at the flowers, sometimes turning to me with words that make my eyes sting with tears. "I'm proud of you, Emily." My mother often helps me cook dinner, laughing as she recalls old memories, her tone no longer sharp but tender in a way I rarely saw when I was younger. I understand now that, though the past left many scars, my parents have truly learned to see me with fairness at last. Ethan, after that painful downfall years ago, finally found a path that was simple but steady. He opened a small auto garage in Pittsburgh, not far from our parents' home. At first, he only had a few regular customers, but through hard work and honesty, he slowly built up his reputation. He no longer boasted on social media, no longer chased after a flashy image. Instead, he began sending money regularly to our parents, not much, just a few hundred each month, but it came from his real labor. Each time he called me, his voice carried responsibility rather than avoidance. "I know it's late, but I'm trying to earn back your trust and Mom and Dad's." Listening to him, I felt for the first time in my life that he was truly my brother, not the hollow image that had once hurt me so deeply. My marriage with Daniel has been peaceful. We head to work together each morning, cook meals together in the evening, and spend weekends tending to the garden. Daniel has always been my steady anchor, the one who taught me that real love never comes from comparison, but from companionship and respect. Looking back, I realize that all the losses and pain I once endured became the very lessons that allow me to cherish what I have today. Often, when I sit alone in the garden, I think about the path I've traveled. I was once the 10-year-old girl forgotten on Christmas night, the high school student presenting a robotics project in a room empty of her parents, the college student juggling 3 jobs just to pay tuition. I was the daughter quietly sending money home, only to be crushed when those sacrifices were denied and turned into someone else's false glory. But I was also the one who, after years of perseverance, finally stood up and claimed my voice. I've come to understand that family only has meaning when it's built on fairness and transparency. Love without fairness is not a support, it becomes a wound that lingers for a lifetime. And perhaps that is the message I want to share with you, the one listening to this story. Have you ever lived in someone else's shadow? Have you ever endured unfair comparisons or dismissive words that made you feel invisible? If so, remember this. Your worth does not lie in the eyes of others, but in what you steadfastly create for yourself. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to speak your truth. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't just set you free, it helps your family see more clearly as well. Finally, I want to invite you to share. What is your story? Have you ever felt overlooked, underestimated? Leave it in the comments because I believe every experience deserves to be heard. And tell me, where are you listening from? I will read every word because your story has value too, and it just might become the light for someone still lost in the dark.